have developed a magic formula which contains four components which we think that are important qualities of a good insight. First component is basically the aha. Good insight needs to be fresh. There needs to be a new way of looking at things. It can be both be on the one hand discovering something completely new that we did not know before, and at the other hand, it can also be something you already knew, but a new way of looking at something. So to look from a different perspective. Typically, it's already latently present, and the moment you discover the insight, you have a kind of aha erlebnis. You really say, yes, this is true. I knew this, but now for the first time, it is so clear for me. So this is the first component, the aha. Secondly, we also think it is important to have the it's me or the consumer relevance. An insight needs to be recognizable for the consumers. People need to recognize themselves in it, and they really need to see that have the feeling that they are understood. So that's the second thing. And finally, to have good consumer insight, well, it's also important to have a kind of excitement or friction, a kind of emotion that is going on. An insight is or based on a friction or a problem that consumers have, something bad that they want to turn into something good, but it can also be something normal that they want to make very positive. So it's actually in both sides that there needs to be this emotional component. This is not all. Good insight, of course, also leads to, I would say, new business. We see insights as the base for both new product innovation, as, for example, also as developing a new brand strategy, a new campaign. But the main thing, of course, is a good insight should bring you new business. So that's what we are looking for. One question that's also important to point out is not only what is an insight about, but also what is it not, because often an insight is confused with two other things. The first thing to realize is that an insight is different from an observation. An observation is typically something you can perceive with your senses. It's something that be objectively described. It's what you see, it's what you hear, it's what you read. Observations are always objective, and everybody, in fact, should make the same observation. It contains no judgment, it contains no explanation, it's not your feelings or your thoughts, it's concrete. And typically, when we look at research, or research reports are full of observations. But we have to do something with it before we can turn it into an insight. We need to have an interpretation, and then we need to shape it in an insight. Secondly, another confusion that's often made is that an insight is the same like an ID or a solution. This is, of course, not true. An ID is referring, I would say, to the marketing execution of an insight. So one insight can easily lead to, like, say, 100 or 200 different IDs. It can also lead to IDs, like I mentioned before, in different product areas. IDs in the way of packaging, product IDs, new ways of communication, and so on. So now that we know what we are looking for, what would be the best strategy to find, or suspect, I would say, to find those consumer insights? Well, there are three main principles that we use to do so. And the first one can be best summarized as if you would only knew what we already know. Because when we, as I already said, when we look for an insight, we want to find something fresh, something new. And of course, it's important in this context to realize what a company or a brand already knows. So we actually can find what's new and what the new angles are to a certain problem. So we need to have an idea of previous research that's done, and we need to also have an idea very well on like what the assumptions and what's in the minds of consumers, of marketeers. There are two ways in which we approach this. The first one is in, I would say, typically a workshop where we connect the dots with previous research, because obviously in a lot of previous studies you already have some interesting observations that you can use to build on your insights. So recycling this information, finding out what's already known is for us a first basic step, and you would be amazed on what piles of information companies are already sitting. Secondly, it's also about capturing existing assumptions, and those are a bit harder, I would say, to capture because most often they're in the heads of the marketeers, and therefore we have developed this game. It's a game where we ask consumers to put in the skin of their marketeers to put in the skin of their consumers, and based on that we game we try to find all existing assumptions that are already there in the company. So that's the first thing. Another way of, again, looking to what's already known is in a different area. It's not within the company, but it is on social media. Because if you look at what we typically do in research is, well, we ask a lot of questions. And in fact, even if we have sometimes trouble in motivating people to take part in our research, and a huge contrast to that, we see that on social media, people freely give their opinion about a lot of things, including information about brands, products, how they feel, how they live. So when we talk about using existing information, it is as important to recycle information that's already there on social media. So it's about getting answers without asking questions, and social media are a very good source for finding new insights. And the reason for that is because on social media, people talk about what they're already engaged about. It's what they find important, and therefore, it is a very good starting point. So that's when it's on well, using existing information. Second principle of our incitement strategy is that we strongly believe that whenever we do incitement, we should start with the consumer. And too often, when you look, for example, at innovation within companies, this is done based on a technology or universal trend, like, for example, sustainable, a topic that's very hot. And I'm not saying that this is the wrong way of innovating or of coming up with new ideas, but it's when we look for good insights, we believe it's better to really start for your consumer target group and start from that perspective. So, power to the people. How do we do that? Well, how do we think consumers can help us to find those insights? Well, obviously, they're very good and help us to discover new insights. And the way in which we do that is through research communities. And research communities are actually, I would say, asynchronous forums where people can talk about 3 weeks to sometimes 3 months or a year or longer about a certain topic. It's a bit comparable to a forum where people that only are selected for the research can participate in. Um, Let me give a more detailed example on how they help us to find insights. Well, typically we start with a blogging phase, and we start from the individual experience or story from consumers. Here you see one of the communities we have run for Air France KLM. So it was a community on incitement for transfer passengers, and there we asked transfer passengers to report live during the transfer and to tell us their story via their mobile. And their mobile is connected to the community, so we can actually read live what's going on. And we believe to start from this experience, to start from the individual story, is a very good beginning in the community. What we always do as well is we give them all kinds of tasks in the sentence that we don't really ask people to give their opinion yet, but we ask them to describe their contents and their life world as more detailed as possible. For example, here you see one study with it for chocolate powder, where we asked people to really do a paparazzi exercise and looked very much in detail how people prepare their Nesquik. On the other hand, we also have activation deprivation exercises where, for example, we ask consumers to start eating a product often or stop eating a product often, and this helps us in this blogging period to also get a better idea on consumer use or usage of certain products. Here you see an example of Heinz. Another technique that is used in this blogging part of the community is the live reporting. We do strongly believe that consumers are very bad testimonials of their own behavior. So, in some occasions, it's much better to ask them to report live from the place they are when they're actually doing something, and then later on they can give us more details on the story. So, that's for the individual part. Obviously, for companies, and I'll come back to that a little bit later, it's also important to understand and to get immersed in the consumer's world, because these blogs provide you with a lot of information, and as a client or a marketeer, you have the possibility to follow this over time, and this can be done through live consumer news on your tweet. It can be done on your Facebook page. It can also be done on a separate blog or on a newsletter where you're updated with the daily activities in the community. The second stage of a research community is actually the common part, and in this type part, all the participants to the blog come together in the forum. And what are we doing there? Well, there are actually three things. The first thing is reflective probing. We're going to look back at all the individual stories, at all the feedback that we collected during the blogging part, and we're going to ask more questions. We're going to go more in depth, and we're going to try really to fine tune what we already found, and eventually to shape the insights. Also, and here you see again an example from the Air France KLM study, is that we're going to create already or stimulate consumers already for to come up with first ideas and actions based on the insights. For example, here you see one of their ideas that consumers made based on the insights we found for the transfer experience. So it's also about, I would say, taking action. First thing, as I said, where we can involve consumers is to help us discover insights. The second thing is obviously that consumers are also very important in validating insights, and this is then more quantitatively. So once we have discovered our insights in the community, we do quantitative screening through a special method that we have developed in cooperation with Heineken. And here you see five of the components that are very central in this quantitative screening. This is, of course, you recognize the freshness, the relevance, and the excitement, three of the main components that also come back in our definition. We also do a check on clarity, on consumer language, and finally, we think it's important that there is a kind of contagious effect of an insight, so it's something that's not only felt by the consumer but also by the consumer's environment. So this is quantitative insight validation. But there's more. We, as researchers, have for too long considered participants and consumers mainly good in giving inputs. But in fact, at the Forward Lab, we discovered recently that consumers are actually also great in helping you out as a researcher. And this is the concept of crowd interpretation. I don't know if you look at this animal on this picture, if you see a duck or a rabbit, but this is the point that actually depending on who you are and what background you have, you can see the same input and you can get different meaning out of this. And this is exactly what we want to do in also crowd interpretation. So what is it? Basically, we invite participants to analyze each other's data. And not only we as researchers do the analysis, but they analyze each other's stories, they analyze each other's inputs, and they come back with conclusions from their angle. And what we have done in the past is we have tested what the added value of this technique is, and what our recent studies are showing, and we're tracking this actually for every study that we are conducting, is that by doing and by involving consumers in the analysis of data, we get between 20 and 40% additional insights found from the same data. And these are insights that are only found by consumers and were not mentioned before or found back before by researchers or even by experts in the topic. Also, well, you can say great, they have a lot of more insights that they come up with, but it's also very important that when we check the quality and how that the insights that are generated by the crowd versus the insights versus researchers, how they're doing in the validation, well, we see that there's no quality difference. So, in fact, consumers are very well capable of finding insights and analyzing each other's behavior, and also the quality is similar to what's coming from a researcher. This is not only done, as I mentioned before, by consumers. So consumers are invited in this crowd interpretation, but we also challenge the internal clients to take part in this crowd interpretation, because what we have noticed in the past is that clients really can also find new insights, and typically insights that are very relevant to the business. So they look again from their perspective and they notice different things from the same data. On top of it, as you see the quote that is illustrated here by one of the people at Heinz, is that they really consider it as a very fun learning experience to actually try to analyze the consumer's behavior and then to get feedback from the consumer and explaining why something went good when something went wrong. And this is, I would say, brings us to the last component of what we believe in when it comes to incitement. Too much in the past, we have focused on, I would say, data collection. So where to find the insights, give us a lot of data. This is important. We also have been talking about analysis, and I think crowd interpretation has some great potential there, and it's definitely adding value. But at the end, it's what you do with it and what it means, what impact it can create in your company. And there we have also developed different techniques. One of the techniques is, as I mentioned already before, the stay tuned. So the fact that already not only during the at the end of research you present the results, but also during the research people get updates on what's going on, and just by seeing the quotes and the stories of consumers, this helps them already to connect, I would say, with their target group. But also next to that, we have the workshop. So at the end of the story, we have all the different insights, and together with the marketing team and people involved in the project, we conduct ideation workshops. So to make sure that something at the end is happening with the insights. And finally, um, it's also about the way in which we communicate about the insights and our results. In the past, often we actually bombarded clients with large reports with 100 slides explaining everything, whereas we try to go for new ways of presenting them. And here you see some examples on infographics, which are actually nice summaries of what's going on, what's happening in insights on the one hand. And on the other hand, we also make sometimes posters, we sometimes make movies, we have interactive pivot viewers where people can actually browse all the pictures. So all those kind of new ways of marketing research results really, I would say, are very important and are the new trends in incitement. So this brings us to the end already of our session. When thinking about consumer insight activation and the nutrients there, it's important, I think, to remember three things. First of all, I highlighted a couple of the aspects that we're using, but it's necessary to realize that consumer insight activation is a structural approach and it's a journey. It starts from starting in the beginning in your company to look at what you already have there. It's going next online to see what people are already saying and what they're engaged about. And then it goes to talking and then even implementing and creating action in your company. It's not something that's done in a one way. Of course, you can just take different modules and just apply short bits to work a bit more focused. Secondly, we really believe, as I mentioned already, in the involvement of consumers in every stage, not only in providing them their input on our questions, but really empowering them and putting them in control by letting them share their story, by giving them their voice in the community. But also when we look to the analysis of the results, so the crowd interpretation, that's also an important step. And finally, we think it's very important towards the whole consumer insight procedure to engage the internal stakeholder and also inspire them and motivate them to action. And that's also where we have created our approach towards. So that was about it. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm open now for questions. So I'm seeing in the chat that there's already one first question from Patrick on crowd interpretation. Yes, I can definitely elaborate a little bit more on that. Crowd interpretation is first of all, so it's as a definition involving consumers in the analysis of research results. It's typically done in an online game. So what we do is on the community, we give people a selection of stories from other consumers, and they're actually asked to do the interpretation. And this is done in several rounds. So they're asking to describe the situation and to say, okay, in this story, what is really striking you? And in this first question already, we see that we often reveal new information because, especially when you receive visual information, people often highlight different things, or they say, okay, this is important from the story, or this is something else that's important. So they already put different, I would say, accents on the same story. That's on describing. Secondly, we also ask them to analyze and to really explain the behavior. So then we say, okay, what does this help us, or how does it help us to learn more about this topic? What does it explain? And then what we do as well is we try to probe them towards an insight. So we ask them again, like, why is this the case? And if you were like kind of anthropologist or a researcher and you had to explain this more in detail, what is going on. So that's the game. As I said, so people get a selection of stories from other consumers. They do the analysis in the three questions, and then in the last round, they see actually what another consumer has analyzed about them, and they can give points. So they can actually say, okay, this is correct, this is not correct, and they can give feedback on that. Typically, we leave the crowd interpretation game open for about 3 days, and this is how we get to useful information. That's the game crowd interpretation for consumers. For marketeers, it's done very similarly in the sense that people also receive an email or a link in their email box with the with the consumer stories. They have to analyze it, but in the case of a marketeer, of course they don't give the points. Their interpretation is going back to the consumer, and then the consumer can provide them with feedback. That's on crowd interpretation. Crowd interpretation is a principle that's applied both in Insightment communities, but we can also apply it on social media data, where we actually ask people not to interpret each other's blog stories or community stories on the research community, but we, for example, ask people to analyze what people have been said on the internet, those kind of things. And the basic principle is that we believe that different people with different backgrounds notice different elements in the data, and therefore this enriches our analysis. Are there any other questions or additional questions? Okay. Okay. I see that somebody else is still typing. We'll have available the presentation. No problem. Okay, no problem. No, we will send all the information of this webinar later on. Okay, well, then thank you for your attention. I hope you all found it interesting. And I'm glad that I was able to share this information with you. Have a nice day.